What does a citizen owe his country when that country is still fighting for survival? In Burkina Faso, that question is no longer being asked only of soldiers carrying weapons on the front lines. It is increasingly being asked of students preparing for adulthood, teachers standing in classrooms, journalists handling sensitive information, civil servants working inside government offices, and ordinary families trying to keep their communities functioning. Under President Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso has placed discipline, integrity, solidarity, work, patriotism, and national sovereignty at the center of a much larger conversation about citizenship. One of the clearest examples is the country's mandatory Patriotic Immersion program. Tens of thousands of young Burkinabe have entered these programs to learn about their history, national values, community responsibility, discipline, and service. But the idea is spreading beyond young people. Government employees and professional groups have also participated in patriotic immersion and training. That raises a fascinating question. Is Burkina Faso simply teaching patriotism? Or is it attempting something much more ambitious, creating a new relationship between the citizen and the state during a national crisis? Because there is another side to this story. If citizens are expected to sacrifice more, work harder, remain disciplined, and contribute to national sovereignty, what should they expect in return from the government? And when patriotism becomes a national duty, can citizens and journalists still question those in power without being considered disloyal? Those questions matter far beyond Burkina Faso. They reach into the wider debate unfolding across the Sahel about sovereignty, security, responsibility, and Africa's future. If you want to follow these changes with us as they unfold across Burkina Faso and the wider African continent, consider following the channel. Because before deciding whether this experiment should be celebrated or criticized, we first need to understand why Burkina Faso believes it needs it. And that begins with a difficult reality. For a country under sustained security pressure, the battlefield does not end where the soldiers come home. It reaches into schools, offices, newsrooms, neighborhoods, and families. Survival depends on those who fight and those who keep society working. To understand why Burkina Faso is asking more from its citizens, we have to look beyond political speeches and examine the pressure facing families. The country has endured years of violence involving armed extremist groups. According to international humanitarian estimates reviewed for this story, about 4.5 million people were affected by humanitarian needs, while nearly 2 million people had been internally displaced. Behind those numbers are families who have left farms, homes, businesses, and familiar communities in search of safety. Displacement does not move the problem somewhere else. It spreads the pressure. When displaced families arrive in town, children still need classrooms. Parents still need food and work. Sick people need medical care. Local authorities must provide services to a larger population, while host families and communities are asked to share resources that may already be limited. This helps explain why the government speaks about national resilience as something larger than military operations. A soldier may defend a road or a village, but soldiers cannot teach every child, clean every neighborhood, operate every public office, verify every piece of information, or keep every local economy functioning. Those responsibilities remain with civilians. That is where the idea of citizenship becomes practical. For an older generation, this principle may sound familiar. During difficult periods, societies often survive because ordinary people continue doing ordinary duties with unusual seriousness. Teachers keep teaching. Farmers keep producing. Health workers keep treating patients. Parents maintain stability inside their families. Communities support neighbors who have lost almost everything. But there is an important distinction. Asking citizens to contribute cannot become an excuse for the state to withdraw from its own responsibilities. National resilience requires both sides. Citizens can help hold society together, while government must provide security, functioning institutions, services, and responsible management of public resources. This is the environment surrounding Burkina Faso's patriotic education programs. They are being introduced not during peace and abundance, but during a period when the country believes social discipline itself has become part of national survival. And nowhere is that experiment more visible than among its young people. The clearest attempt to turn this idea into policy can be seen in Burkina Faso's mandatory Patriotic Immersion program for young people. In 2025, 59,179 students who had passed the baccalaureate took part in the first large national session. The participants included 28,515 young men and 30,664 young women. They were distributed across 136 sites in 23 localities. For 2026, the government announced that more than 65,000 new baccalaureate graduates were expected to participate. The scale matters because this is no longer a symbolic exercise involving a small group. It is becoming a national system. The official goals include discipline, citizenship, solidarity, integrity, patriotism, knowledge of national history, responsible use of media, and service to the community. Participants have also taken part in practical activities such as tree planting, sanitation work, and blood donation. The message is clear. The government does not want citizenship to remain an abstract lesson in a classroom. It wants young people to experience collective rules, shared duties, and service before moving into universities, public administration, private employment, and adult life. Officials often describe this ambition as forming a new type of Burkinabe citizen. That phrase is powerful, but it also deserves careful examination. A government can count how many young people attended a 30-day program. It can record how many training sites operated and how many lessons were delivered. What is much harder to measure is whether those 30 days change behavior 6 months, 5 years, or 20 years later. Does a participant become more responsible at university, more honest at work, more willing to serve a community, more careful about information shared online? Those are the real tests. So the significance of the immersion program is not that it has already proven it can transform a generation. The significance is that Burkina Faso is attempting to institutionalize the belief that citizenship itself can be trained. And if young people are being asked to prove their discipline, the next question becomes unavoidable. What about the adults already running the state? That question matters because discipline loses credibility when it is demanded from young people, but not from the adults who already hold public responsibility. In 2026, Burkina Faso extended patriotic immersion to personnel working within the Prime Minister's office. 508 participants were organized into 3 groups so that government operations could continue while the training took place. The program emphasized discipline, order, humility, integrity, a sense of duty, and stronger cohesion among public employees. Participants were also introduced to elements of military discipline, not to turn civil servants into soldiers, but to demonstrate values such as organization, endurance, and collective responsibility. There is an important message behind that decision. If students are told that national renewal begins with their behavior, public servants cannot reasonably stand outside the same standard. The people processing documents, managing public resources, implementing policies, and receiving citizens also influence whether the country becomes stronger. But attending an immersion program is only the beginning. The real measure of discipline inside government is not how well an employee follows instructions during several days of training. It is what happens afterward. Does a citizen receive a public service without unnecessary delay? Are public funds managed responsibly? Are officials held accountable when mistakes occur? Is corruption confronted? Do government employees treat ordinary people with respect? These questions matter because Burkina Faso's own authorities have acknowledged problems within public administration. In 2026, the government received a review mapping dysfunctions observed in the administration over the previous decade as part of efforts to improve governance and institutional performance. That creates a useful test for the Patriotic project. Discipline should not flow in only one direction, from government towards citizens. If citizens are expected to work harder, contribute resources, and accept greater responsibilities during a national emergency, public institutions must demonstrate the same seriousness. A young Burkinabe can be taught integrity for 30 days, but that lesson will carry far greater weight if the institutions encountered afterward practice integrity as well, every single day. And nowhere is this tension between national duty and professional responsibility more sensitive than in the newsroom. The newsroom is where Burkina Faso's argument about citizenship becomes especially difficult because journalists carry responsibilities both to national security and to the public's right to know. During patriotic training for media professionals, government officials emphasize three values: patriotism, professionalism, and engagement. Their reasoning reflects the country's security situation. In a conflict, careless reporting can have consequences. Publishing unverified claims, exposing sensitive operational information, or revealing locations that place people at risk is not simply a professional mistake. It can endanger lives. From that perspective, asking journalists to handle information responsibly is understandable. But another question immediately follows. What happens when patriotism becomes the standard through which journalism itself is judged? International press freedom organizations have raised concerns about increasing pressure on journalists in Burkina Faso. Reporters Without Borders ranked the country 110th out of 180 countries in its 2026 World Press Freedom Index. Other organizations have reported arrests, media suspensions, intimidation, and cases involving journalists compelled into military service. Those reports should not erase the reality of the terrorist threat. Burkina Faso is not operating under ordinary conditions, and responsible journalism during conflict requires caution that may not be necessary in peacetime. Yet, national security and independent scrutiny do not have to be enemies. Suppose a journalist discovers corruption involving resources intended for displaced families. Suppose public money disappears, an official abuses authority, or a policy is failing citizens. Would remaining silent protect the nation, or would exposing the problem help the nation correct itself? That distinction is crucial. A professional journalist should not recklessly publish information that assists armed groups or places soldiers and civilians in danger. But patriotism cannot automatically mean protecting officials from legitimate scrutiny. In fact, a country fighting for survival may need accurate journalism more, not less. Mistakes hidden today can become larger failures tomorrow. Burkina Faso is therefore confronting a difficult boundary: how to demand responsibility from the media without turning responsibility into obedience. And that debate leads directly to the political vision behind this broader transformation and to the man most closely associated with it, President Ibrahim Traore. President Ibrahim Traore stands at the center of this national experiment, but understanding his influence requires looking beyond the image of one leader transforming an entire country. Traore has repeatedly connected Burkina Faso's struggle for sovereignty with order, discipline, work, integrity, and citizen participation. In his political vision, the fight for the nation does not end when soldiers leave the battlefield. The same determination expected from fighters is supposed to appear in classrooms, government offices, workplaces, neighborhoods, and communities. That helps explain the Patriotic Immersion programs. Under Traore's government, patriotic education has moved beyond speeches and into institutional policy. Young people are being trained before entering university and adult life. Civil servants and professional groups are also being asked to examine their responsibilities. The broader objective is often described by authorities as creating a new Burkinabe citizen. But Traore's definition of patriotism extends even further. Citizens have been encouraged to support domestic production, consume Burkinabe products, maintain clean communities, respect public property, work seriously, and contribute to national development. Sovereignty, in this interpretation, is therefore not merely about removing foreign influence or defending national borders. It is also about developing the internal capacity to stand independently. The message can be summarized simply: no citizen should remain merely a spectator. That idea carries considerable power during a crisis. A farmer, teacher, journalist, civil servant, business owner, or parent can believe that everyday work contributes to national survival. Yet the same idea creates an important question. Who determines what makes someone a good patriot? A citizen who exposes corruption may be criticizing an institution while protecting the country. A journalist who questions an official claim may be demanding evidence rather than opposing the nation. A young person who challenges a policy may still deeply love Burkina Faso. This is where Traore's vision faces one of its most important tests. If patriotism can coexist with accountability and responsible criticism, it may strengthen citizenship. If patriotism requires unquestioning agreement, its meaning becomes much narrower. Ultimately, Traore's project will be judged not only by the loyalty it inspires, but by the kind of citizens and institutions it produces. But citizenship is not tested only through politics, government institutions, or national speeches. Sometimes its clearest expression begins outside a family's front door. Burkina Faso's campaigns against malaria provide a practical example. Communities have been encouraged to remove standing water, clear waste, clean drainage channels, eliminate mosquito breeding sites, and participate directly in improving their surroundings. These actions may appear small beside a national security crisis, but their consequences can be significant. At one health facility in Nabrabogo, uncomplicated malaria cases among children younger than 5 reportedly fell from 531 in 2024 to 168 in 2025. Health authorities connected the improvement with prevention efforts that included community participation. That result comes from one location and should not be presented as evidence that malaria has fallen by the same amount across Burkina Faso. What it does demonstrate is a broader principle. Citizens can influence national resilience through ordinary behavior. A government can organize campaigns and provide health services, but it cannot personally remove every pool of stagnant water beside every home. It cannot clean every drainage channel without cooperation. Families and neighborhoods remain part of the solution. The same principle extends beyond malaria. Protecting public property, helping vulnerable neighbors, keeping streets clean, donating blood, planting trees, and maintaining stability within families may never receive the attention given to military victories. Yet these actions help preserve the society soldiers are fighting to defend. For older generations, there is something familiar in this idea. A nation survives difficult years because millions of people continue fulfilling responsibilities that rarely make headlines. Patriotism, viewed this way, becomes less about what someone declares and more about what someone repeatedly does. But Burkina Faso is taking that principle one step further. Citizens are not only being encouraged to contribute their time and effort, they are also being asked to contribute resources. One of the clearest examples of citizens contributing resources is Burkina Faso's Patriotic Support Fund, created to mobilize domestic financing during the security crisis. According to government figures reviewed for this story, nearly 497 billion CFA francs had been mobilized over 3 years. That is roughly 880 million United States dollars, although the dollar value changes with the exchange rate. The importance of this figure goes beyond money. It shows how the government is attempting to transform patriotism from an emotional commitment into measurable national capacity. Citizens, businesses, workers, and institutions are being encouraged to participate in financing the country's response to its challenges rather than depending entirely on external assistance. This fits directly into Ibrahim Traore's broader message about sovereignty. A country that wants greater political independence must eventually ask how much of its security, infrastructure, food, public services, and development it can finance and produce for itself. But mobilizing resources creates another responsibility. The more citizens are asked to contribute, the stronger the case becomes for transparency. People should be able to ask where money goes, how it is managed, what results it produces, and what safeguards exist against misuse. Those questions should not be interpreted as opposition to patriotism. They are part of protecting the sacrifices citizens have made. This creates a simple principle: contribution and accountability should grow together. Burkina Faso's ability to mobilize hundreds of billions of CFA francs demonstrates that appeals to national responsibility can produce substantial resources. What those figures alone cannot demonstrate is whether every contribution has been used efficiently or whether the model can be sustained indefinitely. That judgment requires transparent results over time. And this distinction between supporting national sovereignty and demanding accountability becomes especially important when we examine the criticism coming from outside Burkina Faso. Criticism from outside Burkina Faso has become another battlefield in the debate over Ibrahim Traore's political project. But reducing that criticism to a simple story of the West opposing Burkina Faso would hide important questions. International organizations have raised concerns about restrictions on press freedom, shrinking political space, and alleged abuses committed during counterterrorism operations. Human Rights Watch has documented allegations involving civilians and has also reported serious atrocities committed by armed groups linked to extremist organizations. These claims deserve examination, not automatic acceptance or automatic rejection. Burkina Faso is confronting a genuine armed threat. Communities have been attacked, families displaced, and soldiers and civilians killed. Any assessment of the government that ignores this reality would be incomplete. Decisions made during such a conflict cannot always be judged as though the country were experiencing normal peacetime conditions. But the existence of terrorism does not eliminate the state's responsibility toward its own citizens. Protecting civilians is not separate from defeating terrorism. It is one of the reasons terrorism must be defeated. The same principle applies to political and media freedoms. National security can justify protecting operational information and preventing actions that directly endanger lives. It should not automatically make every criticism of government policy an act against the nation. There is also reason to examine Western criticism itself carefully. Outside institutions have their own histories, interests, assumptions, and political environments. Their conclusions should therefore be tested against evidence rather than treated as unquestionable authority. The standards should be consistent for everyone. When Traore's government claims progress, ask for measurable results. Is more territory secure? Are displaced families returning? Are institutions improving? When Western organizations make accusations, ask what evidence supports them, what methodology was used, and whether the same standards are applied elsewhere. Burkina Faso's future should not be judged through a contest of personalities or slogans. The better question is whether policies actually make citizens safer, institutions stronger, and sovereignty more meaningful. And that leads to the final lesson. Because Burkina Faso's experiment is increasingly being watched far beyond its borders. What then can the rest of Africa learn from Burkina Faso? The first lesson is that sovereignty requires capacity. A nation may declare its independence from outside influence, but sovereignty remains incomplete if it cannot educate its children, protect communities, produce essential goods, finance institutions, and create opportunities for its people. The second lesson is that patriotism must work in both directions. Citizens can be asked to respect public property, contribute resources, work honestly, strengthen their communities, and defend national interests. But government must accept its responsibilities, protecting civilians, managing public money transparently, improving services, confronting corruption, and answering legitimate questions. Patriotism without accountability carries risks. Accountability without civic responsibility can become equally hollow. This is why Burkina Faso should not yet be treated as a model that every African country must copy. It is better understood as an experiment worth watching carefully. Its success will ultimately depend on measurable results, not applause, slogans, or international criticism. That matters for Mali and Niger. where Assimi Goïta and Abdurrahmane Chiani are also leading countries searching for new relationships with regional institutions and traditional foreign partners. Across West Africa and the Sahel, debates about security, sovereignty, foreign military involvement, economic independence, and relations with France are changing how many citizens imagine their future. The African Union will also have to confront these questions as younger populations demand institutions capable of translating sovereignty into everyday improvements. And this is where the story of Ibrahim Traore becomes larger than Ibrahim Traore himself. A leader can inspire discipline. A government can create patriotic programs. But no president can personally build an entire nation. That work eventually belongs to teachers, farmers, workers, soldiers, journalists, entrepreneurs, parents, public servants, and communities. The most valuable lesson from Burkina Faso may therefore be neither obedience nor rebellion. It may be responsibility. A responsible citizen asks what he can contribute. A responsible government accepts that citizens can ask what it has delivered. A responsible journalist protects lives without abandoning the truth. And a sovereign country learns to cooperate with others without surrendering its ability to decide its own future. That balance matters because national unity is strongest when citizens feel they are participants, not merely subjects. Duty becomes more credible when sacrifice is shared, institutions are accountable, and people can see results from effort. For those following African news, these questions surrounding Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and the wider continent deserve attention long after today's headlines disappear. So ask yourself this: if your country were facing its most difficult years, where would your responsibility begin? And where should the responsibility of government begin? Share your answer with us and follow the channel as we continue examining the choices shaping Africa's future. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. Every video on this channel is carefully researched, thoughtfully written, and meticulously edited by our dedicated team. We don't rely on automated production or shortcuts to create our content. Every story, every visual, and every detail is crafted with genuine care, passion, and a commitment to bringing you meaningful, high-quality videos.